It took the United States roughly 200 years to accumulate its first $1 trillion in national debt. Reaching that number required immense effort. That first trillion covered the cost of surviving the Great Depression, fighting the entirety of World War II, and helping to rebuild the post-war world. Today, the pace is different. The national debt has reached $39 trillion. Instead of taking centuries, the government is now adding new trillions to that total in a matter of months. This sharp turn in the data suggests that the way the country handles its finances has shifted. A debt load growing at this speed is starting to look less like a balance sheet entry and more like a threat to the country's long-term stability. To understand why this is happening, think of the national economy like a giant household budget. The government collects its income through taxes and then uses that money to pay for things like roads, a military, and public schools. But every year, the United States spends more than it brings in. To cover that gap, the government takes out a loan. They do this by selling treasury bonds, essentially a contract where the government promises to pay an investor back later with interest. These bonds are bought by all kinds of people and institutions. Banks hold them, regular investors buy them, and foreign countries, including those with very different political interests, buy them in massive amounts. This borrowing creates a specific kind of pressure. If a country relies on a foreign lender to keep its lights on, that lender gains influence over the borrower's financial health. If those foreign creditors ever stopped buying these bonds or suddenly decided to sell the ones they already have, it could trigger a crisis in the American economy. That $39 trillion debt isn't just one giant bill that comes due at once. It's actually made up of millions of individual smaller loans, and each one expires at a different time. Because the government is already spending more than it earns, it doesn't have any savings to pay off these loans when they expire. Instead, they have to take out a new loan to pay back the old one. This is a process called refinancing. The problem with this cycle is that the terms of the loan can change. A bond from a few years ago might have had a very low interest rate, maybe around 1%. But when it expires today, the new replacement bond has to match today's higher market rates, which are now closer to 4%. This means the government doesn't fully control its own costs. Every single time an old loan expires, the country is stuck with whatever interest rate the market is currently demanding. Right now, those market rates are being pushed higher by global issues. For example, if conflict in a major shipping lane, like the Strait of Hormuz, slows down oil tankers, the cost of energy and transport goes up everywhere. When the prices of everyday goods start rising like this, the Federal Reserve, the central bank, usually raises interest rates to try and cool the economy down and bring prices back under control. This creates a direct conflict for the government. While the Fed is raising rates to fight inflation, the government is simultaneously forced to refinance its massive debt at those exact same elevated rates. This leads to a mathematical trap called a debt spiral. It happens when the interest on your existing loans becomes so expensive that you have to borrow even more money just to pay the interest you already owe. Look at how interest costs compared to other parts of the budget. In recent years, the annual interest expense has shot up past $1 trillion, which means it has now surpassed what the government spends on national defense or most healthcare programs. As interest payments take up a larger and larger share of the budget, there is simply less money left over for actual public services. The interest costs start to push aside the very programs, like infrastructure and education, that taxpayers actually pay for. Mathematically, there are only 3 ways to stop this cycle. Path 1 is to cut spending. But most government spending goes to programs that millions of people rely on, like Social Security. Reducing these benefits would create immediate hardship for a huge portion of the population. Path 2 is to raise taxes to bring in more income. However, both political parties are generally resistant to this, as taking more money out of people's paychecks is a difficult policy to sell to voters. Path 3 is to hope the economy grows faster than the debt. The problem today is that the interest on the debt is compounding so quickly that it is outrunning the growth of the overall economy. None of these paths are easy. Every available solution requires the public to accept a significant level of sacrifice. Because these choices are so painful, it's difficult for leadership in Washington to reach a consensus. The result is political gridlock, where the easiest path is to simply avoid the problem entirely. Instead of making these hard trade-offs, the government often chooses to continue running a deficit, adding even more to the debt, while hoping the situation improves on its own. It's the equivalent of a person struggling with debt opening a new credit card just to pay the minimum balance on their old one. The math of the debt now acts as a ceiling on what the country can actually do. Until leadership addresses the underlying cycle of borrowing and interest, the country will continue to sink deeper into the very hole it's trying to climb out of.